So Zaid, one of the things you brought up was that the public is being misled, right? Like the Skin Cancer Foundation, they're saying any tan is dangerous. All these different organizations, they're pushing sunscreen usage, and I think, like I said, I want to have a little bit of a nuance in our discussion here. I think they're coming at this from a very kind of basic understanding, not from a complex system understanding, right? They just think the sun causes damage, it's increasing cancer, like they see melanoma increase when these people get a sun. And so because of that, they think it's good. And there's a lot of epidemiological evidence potentially to support this point of view, right? And maybe there's a lot of incentives there that then push this view even further. But why are so many people misinformed? Like what we consider to be experts, why are they misinformed? Why do you believe they are?
I'll tell you first and foremost is because it is a lot of work to sit down and actually piece all of these things together, especially like get into evolutionary biology when you start getting into non-visual photoreceptors and how the eye works. They're on PubMed, they're readily available, but they take some work. And I don't think most people are willing to do that work in order to find this stuff and really create a comprehensive understanding of the entire subject. And one big problem that I have, and of course I appreciate science, I think it's contributed a lot to many good things within the past however many years. But I do think there's a big problem with this reductionist philosophy and just slapping that onto life, especially complex systems that really work counterintuitively. Which is why like I do value bringing a more holistic approach to this and really understanding these subjects from multiple angles. So again, I think in terms of the skin cancer, the melanoma, the sunscreen, all of this stuff, I think that conventional medicine has taken that reductionist approach and just slapped it onto sunlight in general.
Because it's easier, right? The reductionist approach essentially says it's this one variable that's causing this, and because it's this one variable, we create a product that addresses this one variable, and we're going to sell that product, and then you're free and happy, right? This happens with cholesterol, right? Statin drugs, like the mechanism of heart disease is cholesterol. We're going to take red yeast rice, derive this one little molecule, call it a statin, synthesize it, and this is what's going to reduce your cholesterol. And there's some truth to the essence of that complex system, that maybe it does show better health outcomes to some degree, but what are the second, third, fourth order effects of something like that in a complex system? So go a little bit deeper. You said the reductionist approach versus kind of the complex systems approach, right? So can you, like, for someone who might not really understand that, can you define what you mean when you say the reductionist approach? Is that essentially just looking at one variable and then deciding to address that?
Yeah, I think it's analogous to taking an observational study of saying, oh, meat causes cancer, but then not taking a look at the other lifestyle factors that somebody is following who does, get a cancer, stage 4 or 5 cancer diagnosis. I mean, to me, that's absurd. Like, in my mind, observational evidence it shouldn't even be classified as evidence, in my opinion, because there's so many other factors involved. Who's to say it's not the blue light? Who's to say it's not the lack of sleep or the fact that you work night shift? So, it's a very real problem that I think we're dealing with in science today. And I mean, if you want to go a level deeper as well, like, science assumes that we operate from a Newtonian perspective, when we know that we operate from a quantum perspective. Like, time is not absolute, time is relative. And as a result, there could be a lot of problems with the way that science is done, because we're just taking that perspective and slapping it onto everything.
Mm-hmm. So you're going into areas that are very esoteric, so to speak, and this is something that Jack Cruz touched on in his podcast with Andrew Huberman. Is essentially, and for those who don't know, I mean, Newtonian gravity was the major paradigm for 400 years, for 300 years, right? Like, this is how all motion on this planet worked. And then Einstein comes along with special relativity and general relativity. Eventually, he changes that paradigm, and then beyond that, that doesn't even apply to the quantum level or to the subatomic and particle level, right? And that's really how all biology, yeah.
Exactly, which is how our bodies work. I mean, at the quantum biological level, that's how it is.
Yeah, but so expand. So what are the implications of that? If all biology works on a quantum biological level, and you are saying that we are applying kind of, more general principles to this, like, what do you mean? Like help me understand this a little bit further, what the implications of that are on, like, the science we do, for instance.
Well, in general, I think This is very interesting. I mean, you can talk about, Jack Cruz has discussed light controls within the laboratories for these science, for these studies, and I completely agree. Like, who's to say that light can't completely change the outcome of a certain study on like neurodegenerative disease, mitochondria, all this stuff. And then to focus on a different level, I think we should really anchor a lot of our understanding in Mother Nature, because the course of billions of years of of evolution and biological adaptation, like that stuff is no joke. And as a result, Mother Nature or nature, whatever you want to call it, creates a perfect system. Our bodies, as it's intended to work, is a perfect system. And the moment we take this reductionist approach and start to isolate cholesterol from other parts of the body and things of that nature, is the moment we get in trouble, because that's when you have those knock-on consequences that we can't foresee.
Let me push back a little bit. You said nature creates a perfect system. Now, nature, because we have to define perfect, right? Like maybe it creates an ideal scenario for the passing on of genes, for instance, right? That doesn't mean it necessarily creates a perfect scenario for what we want to achieve, which is maybe living to 120 years old, being healthy and happy, right? And the example, like there's this idea of, like back our ancestors, and I think we should derive a lot of knowledge from our ancestors, but at the same time, their life expectancies weren't that great. They were dealing with death and disease at much higher rates, mostly from parasites, viral illnesses, war, and those type of things, which we've actually solved to a major degree. But now we've introduced this new set of problems with chronic illness, right? So, but isn't there things that nature, it's not optimal for modern life that we do need to address?
I mean, in regards to like I do have a different perspective on the lifespan of like hunter-gatherers. I think infant mortality accounts for a lot of that. But even then, if you look at like hunter-gatherer tribes,
let me just pause right there, because you said something important. So nature creates a perfect system, but then one out of every 3 babies used to die. Right? That's crazy, right? Like 1 out of every 3 babies used to die, and we solved that problem. But that could have other consequences, but it was a good thing that we solved that problem. Would you say that?
So you're right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like science does solve a lot of these problems that we've had in the past. And that goes to your question of how do we define perfect? And I was actually having a conversation with a couple friends on this too. It's like perfect. I view the perfection in the sense that everything works as it is, and everything evolved to do its duty, to fulfill its role. Because if you look at Mother Nature, like, you don't need any, the bees know exactly what to do when it comes to flowers. The birds know exactly where to fly just intuitively. Like, I do think that nature does create the perfect system in that sense. But that doesn't mean that perfection is without any like disease or death or mortality or anything like that, because that's a part of life. You have life on one hand, you have death on the other. So again, there is a lot of stuff to this, and I think, of course, disease and all these other things. Modern medicine has done a great job in terms of like acute injuries, acute illnesses, in my opinion. If I have a broken leg, I'm going to go to a doctor. I'm going to go to a hospital. But I do think they miss the ball drastically when it comes to chronic disease, when it comes to some various other areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we were in complete agreement there, is that, sometimes I do have clients who they don't want to see a doctor under any circumstances. And I'm like, you need to go see a doctor actually in these certain circumstances, because there's a lot of good they could do. It's just that I think there are a lot of misaligned incentives that affect chronic disease treatment and especially prevention, right? Like it's really our environments that are creating so much dysfunction in our lives, and we just put a Band-Aid over a lot of things. So totally in agreement over there. And so a lot of what you're saying is making sense. So from an evolutionary perspective, the light environment is essential for growth and development. And, sun exposure seems to be very, very essential. And, people should get more sun, be conscious of that, build their solar callus, and then also avoid the blue light. Is there anything else that we're missing here from the light equation?
That should pretty much cover it. I'd say avoid, especially like, so the reason why artificial blue light is problematic is because it's isolated. So when you have sunlight, you're also getting other light wavelengths, such as red, which is extremely regenerative. We have a lot of evidence to show that red light therapy, photobiomodulation, laser therapy is extremely helpful for our biology. So, I'd probably add that as a caveat. But really just aligning yourself with circadian biology is the most important
Mm-hmm.
thing. Maximizing sunlight in the day, and then, of course,
Mm-hmm.
minimizing any artificial blue light during the night.
And so when you say maximizing sunlight, as much as I love the idea of just taking off my shirt and just going around walking everywhere, that's also not a possibility. So how important is it to get just exposure? So most of us are in short sleeve shirts, and maybe they're getting exposure face and neck area. How important is it to get full body exposure to the sun?
Extremely, because clothing blocks a lot of those beneficial light wavelengths that you receive. So you need direct skin contact for a lot of the benefit. And especially for vitamin D production, like, this is something I've never understood. Why has centralized medicine or the conventional establishment praised vitamin D3 so much? Yet on the opposite hand, they're demonizing the very thing that's best at creating vitamin D3. Because food, you don't get, I mean, there are only a handful of foods, maybe sardines, salmon, that you get vitamin D3 from, but even then they're negligible. You're not going to
Mm-hmm.
raise your D3 status with that. And then in regards to supplements, I do believe in the philosophy that you shouldn't really take exogenously what your body produces endogenously.
Does that apply to everything though? Because people take melatonin at night. People take all sorts of different things that our body. I mean, people take hormones now, right? People are on hormone therapy, and obviously, once again, the nuance there is that it can downregulate production of your hormone systems. But if you are trying to address any sort of dysfunction in your body, isn't there ways to do that safely?
I believe so. I don't think it applies to every single thing, but I would be particularly careful, of course, with any of the hormones like testosterone and everything. You have to do that stuff correctly. And I would particularly be very cautious of melatonin. The work Dr. Jack Cruz is, in my opinion, has shown that melatonin supplementation is a terrible idea, because then your body compensates and it takes it from certain places like the eye, anywhere else that it's produced. So that is a real concern in my opinion. And I think, again, going
It
back to
downregulates melatonin production if you consume melatonin at night.
from what I've seen based off of his work, it actually takes endogenous melatonin from certain places that your body produces it, such as the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
And are you aware of what the consequences of something like that are if you've done that? Like, if someone has been taking melatonin for a very long period of time, what do you think are some of the negatives of that?
well, I think it's of course, melatonin is extremely powerful antioxidant. It's extremely crucial to our circadian rhythm and our sleep wake cycles. So I would say you have very serious knock on effects. Of course, there's probably no research on this. I don't know. But I would say that if you start messing with the system from a chronic perspective like that, then there's an inevitable sort of backlash from your body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's an important point. We have to be conscious of that. People think of the body as just a simple system where there's just inputs and outputs, and every single input has multiple. And the craziest example is actually vitamin D3. You brought up vitamin D3. If your vitamin D3 is low, yes, okay, you could take a bunch of vitamin D3. But if that vitamin D3 doesn't have certain cofactors or other vitamins along with it, it is being deposited, or rather calcium is being deposited in the wrong areas, right? If you don't take vitamin D3 with K2, that is actually causing calcium absorption into your arteries, potentially causing blockages and calcification, right? So this is a major complex system. And people think that it's just very straightforward, and we take all these supplements and we don't understand complex systems biology, because it is the most complex thing in the universe, in a sense, right?
And let's put it into perspective. Like, I love the mitochondria. The moment I learned this about the mitochondria, my mind was absolutely blown. Within each mitochondria, and there are countless number of them in your body, there are about 30,000 what we call ATPase nanomotors. So from a biological perspective, there are tiny nanomotors within each mitochondria that are responsible for ATP production. And so that's why I go back to the free electrons. That's why I go back to the red light wavelengths, because those are the really only two resources that those nanomotors can use for the production of energy. And if we don't allow that process to function optimally, then we run into some really serious chronic problems, which I think are responsible for most of the disease rates out here.
Okay, well, actually, that's a very, very important point. You're saying, like, so essentially the power plants of our cells rely on all this nano machinery, and each one of these little machines, for them to function properly, the basic physical laws say that they have to have certain wavelengths of light and certain electrons? Is that how do you say it? Like what else do they need to function properly?
So red light wavelengths from sunlight, of course, and then free electrons, which first and foremost we get from food, but also a very interesting area where we get them is from grounding, in my opinion, especially based off of some of the research. So that's of course another discussion, but I think it's extremely compelling once you take on that perspective.
Yeah, people look at me all weird when I go to the park these days because I'm always barefoot, and it just feels good to me. I'm just always like, we say the word grounding, but I never heard of this concept before a few years ago, and it does sound like woo woo when you first hear about it. You're like, what? There's electrons being discharged, and all this stuff is happening biologically. But my perspective is maybe I don't know everything, but it seems reasonable, and it definitely feels good, and it doesn't hurt, right? So why not go grounding? And you're saying it's way more consequential than that. Actually, you're saying that it affects fundamentally biology, physiology at a very deep level, which is that has very important implications. So yeah, we will get into that topic in a future discussion, the grounding topic and the water topic. So let's briefly touch on red light, okay? Because we talked about sunlight, but I work for a company called Nextel. We have red light therapy, but you could go get red light therapy done. So is that analogous to sunlight, or is that different? Or if I'm getting red light therapy a couple times a week, what are the benefits of that? Can you go into some detail?
I think there's great benefit to it. I mean, I even have a red light therapy machine. I use it on occasion. I've definitely dialed down my use of it ever since diving into this whole sunlight story. But I think it's a valuable tool for people who don't get as much sun. So people who are in Alaska, people who are farther from the equator, I think it's extremely valuable for them because it allows them to get those red light wavelengths, which would just essentially be a replacement for the sun. Of course, I don't believe it's a one-to-one replacement. I think the sun provides so much more. But
what about those light? Because there is light therapy in places like Russia and stuff like that, where they're like giant light lamps. But that's different than the red light therapy, though, right? Specifically,
it might depend on the lamp. I think if they use like chicken brooder lamps, then those offer some benefit, but they're not strong enough to offer the benefit that we see in scientific research.
Okay, got it. But targeted red light therapy, or just like full body red light therapy with actually infrared light, though, that is essentially increasing the efficiency of mitochondria. Is that just a basic way to put it?
Yeah, I mean it's doing some great things with nitric oxide too, which has a lot of potential benefit. And it's just increasing the energy efficiency of the system. And I don't know if you've seen this from Dr. Jack Cruz, but he talks about how it's very interesting theory of when a system loses energy, it gets bigger. So what does this say about obesity? Like, for example, when a star dies, it gets bigger right before it explodes. When you sprain your ankle, it gets bigger as a natural response. So I really do think a lot of this comes down to lack of energy efficiency. For some reason, there's some energy leak within the system, and I think a lot of what we've discussed is responsible for that. But in terms of red light therapy, I think a lot of the work, or a lot of the benefit comes down to the mitochondrial function, like hair loss, skin elasticity, eyesight. I mean, there's so much research from everywhere on it.
So if I got one of these red light machines, what would a general protocol you think be for that?
I like to do it 10 to 15 minutes. I like to bookend it basically in my day. So in the morning and then right before bed. For 10 to 15 minutes, about 6 to 12 inches away with as much of your skin exposed. If you have a problematic area, like if you have psoriasis of the scalp, you put your scalp right to the panel, maybe not directly on it, but really close, and you just stick with that. And over time, you see substantial improvement.
Fascinating. Yeah, I have a history of very severe atopic allergies, and red light therapy is potentially a benefit. I think the issue is that it does require pretty chronic exposure to see benefits, right? Like the acute effects, you might not be so noticeable. Is that fair to say? Or should people just feel good afterwards, after like a session or something?
I'd say you definitely notice acute effects. Increase in energy. Like the first time I used a red light therapy panel, I woke up with I basically woke up with my eyes wide open. I usually have great sleep. I usually have a little bit of grogginess, but I have very rarely experienced that feeling where it's just like you're on alert. and you're just ready for the day. So I think there's a lot of acute benefit that people see, but in terms of like, you know, chronic disease, but just alleviating chronic disease, I guess it's going to take some time.
Okay, that makes sense. So before we end here, just a few quick just tips I want to go over. So we talked about the benefits of AM sun exposure, exposing as much of your body as possible in the morning. You know, it's going to set your circadian rhythm. Has a lot of other implications. Maybe some targeted even afternoon, just going for a walk or something. What about what's the importance of the sunset itself?
So that is, of course, I think there's an element of beauty to it, which I think adds a lot to human health and human just mental health too. More of a spiritual type of perspective. But I think a lot of it derives from the fact that there is an extraordinary amount of red light coming off of that. Because when the sun comes down or it comes up, it's bouncing at an angle. And as a result, it blocks a lot of the other light wavelengths and it just purely focuses on red light. So in terms of like more esoteric areas like eye regeneration and things of that nature, I am actually a big fan of sun gazing, but you have to do it in the proper context. It's always context.
Does it help with sleep? Because sleep, I find sleep for me is the biggest variable in kind of how I feel the next day, and it is something that's I've always actively worked on. And I think when I've seen you post your sleep scores, and they're just absolutely ridiculous. I don't know. I wish I could sleep like as good as you're sleeping. I have some work to do in that area. So how about some tips for sleep? And so what is the importance? Luckily, I'm facing west. If I am kind of have the, you know, facing towards a window or have the screen open and I'm facing west, you know, in the evening, does that help with sleep?
For sure, but you have to make sure the window's open. So
Yeah.
a lot of the beneficial red light wavelengths are blocked by glass, by most conventional glass. So that's an important one. But in terms of like watching sunrise and sunset, like that's probably one of the best things you can do for sleep and just circadian biology as a whole. And other things, you know, of course, sleeping with cool temperature, anywhere from 60 to 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Making sure that you try to get as much sun as you can within reason, because that also stimulates a form of melatonin that helps you for sleep. And then also inducing darkness, as much candlelight, fireplaces, bonfires. That also stimulates another form of melatonin. I believe it's the subcellular form of melatonin.
Mm-hmm. And then what about light at night? Meaning, some of us, unfortunately, have some devices here that have some LED blue lights on them. I woke up last night and there was a big LED blue light just blinking on my thing. Now, I wear an eye mask to go to sleep, but what effect are those lights having on my ability to sleep well or get deep sleep? Is my body sensing those lights in the room?
Oh yeah, massive effects. I think first of all, it's raising cortisol. It's tricking your body into believing that it is daytime when it's not. It's also independent of food, by the way. It's raising your blood sugar, just blue light exposure. And we
What is the
have
mechanism? Are you aware of the mechanism there?
I'm not sure what the mechanism is, but I remember reading. I'll pull it up and I'll send it to you. But it did show a pretty substantial. I think they compared people who had artificial light exposure in the evening compared to those who don't, and in the morning following after that without any other inputs.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, just common sense. I mean, that might affect sleep quality, and we know for a fact that diminished sleep quality is going to affect blood sugar regulation and insulin response the next day, right? Like that's just like well known, and the mechanism is well understood there. So that could even be part of the mechanism there. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then what was I? Were we talking about light? Just light.
Yeah, just having blue, like having some lighting at night, LED, like lights, like device lights and stuff like that. I'm just curious. Like, what I really want to get to is like how important are these matters really, right? Because everybody is exposed to these, and we all can't be perfect. So just to give you an example, right? We could say, you know, microplastics are bad. Plastic is bad. Avoid things in plastic. But every now and then, I'm going to drink out of a plastic water bottle because that's my only choice, and I'm not going to be worried about it, right? Because it's just freaking like it's not a big deal if you're doing it every now and then. It's just, but if everything is plastic, then it's a big deal, right? So what I want to understand is like, so how important is like, you know, having a couple lights on here and there at nighttime versus what you're saying is like, you know, we need to be by candlelight, fire, and all these things. I want to get an understanding of like the how important these things are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really do believe that light environment is more important than nutrition, hydration. I usually couple light environment and sleep because they work in tandem, but I do think it's the most important fundamental keystone pillar of health. I think without that, you're going to have a lot of terrible consequences as a result of not keeping your light environment in check. And here's the thing: if you do it every once in a while, you go to a party, you're not wearing your blue light blockers, whatever. It's not going to make a huge difference in terms of like your disease risk and stuff like that. But the key difference here is that most people are constantly being bathed in this stuff 24/7. So it's not that they're not even starting from the moderate place. They're starting from the most extreme. And I think that is problematic because there is a lot of research to show that it just does a number on our biology.
Yeah. So last thing, just a few tips. Most of us have to be in front of a screen for work and doing different things. I use a program called Flux in the evening. Like, are you familiar with Flux, which does the light filter? Most phones, we have options that Apple has, which has the filter option. You can also turn it black and white. So just give us a quick overview. Like, are we needing to have this filter on at all times on our computer? Are we having to wear blue light blockers at all times? Is that if I just wear it during the last 2 hours before I sleep, is that good? Give me some information on some of those practices.
Sure. So anytime you're on technology, I think it's a really good idea to either wear blue light blockers, have Flux installed. I know Flux doesn't actually block the screen flicker, which is really problematic for eyesight health. So Iris, I think, is another one that actually blocks the flicker as well. And then in terms of the phone, I'm a big fan of something called One Tap Zap. So it's just it creates like a shortcut widget on your phone, and one click, you block all the red light, all the flicker, everything.
I gotta get that app. I didn't even know about that one.
Oh, it's only like $20. It's so cheap. It's on Twitter. And then in terms of like, I think it's more important to focus on the evening routine and making sure that you're relatively militant about the light in that context, because then you're going to impact sleep, circadian biology, a whole bunch of other stuff. And really just maintaining, because realistically, a lot of the stuff is not hard. It's relatively simple, and knowing that we have more and more research piling up on itself in regards to light environment and circadian biology, I think, the risk to reward ratio is it's worth focusing on.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been very insightful. I mean, I am just kind of, dipping my own toes into this vast knowledge here. I've been focusing so much on things like nutrition, movement, sleep. I'm sure you've focused on that as well with your clients. And, we're both really just learning through this and getting and gathering as much information as possible. So I hope when people see this discussion, they see it in that context that, we're learning. And these are important things. And I think if I could end with a takeaway, and you could have your own takeaway, it's that we have evolved in a completely different environment than the environment we're exposed to today, right? And in today's society, the illness and health issues that most people deal with are very, very different as well. And that's really what we're trying to address. It is not normal to have low energy throughout the day. It is not normal to, just feel depressed and anxious all the time. It's just not normal to just go through the life with just this drudgery, right? It is important to have vitality and energy and all of these things. And all both of us are trying to figure out is all the variables that are involved in that equation. And what you brought up is essentially there's a lot of misunderstood variables like light and the earth and water that we need to take into account more. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And, I really appreciate you having me on for this discussion, because I think that's what we need most of all. Just people who are willing to engage in conversation respectfully, because it feels like a lot of people are cutthroat in terms of how they approach conversation. Like, it's my ideology against yours. And I think we've seen what impact that has on society. So I do appreciate just being on here and really just having a back and forth.
Yeah, I love that, Zaid, and we'll continue this. We'll continue talking about these topics. There's so much topics to learn, and like I said, every time I do any sort of conversation like this, I always come away learning so much. So I appreciate you giving the time here, and I would just tell anybody who's still watching this, thank you, and just stay tuned with both of us, and we'll put out content, and we'll continue talking about these things in a deep manner. Thanks, Zaid.
Thank you. It's a fun time.